Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, friendo sapien. Well, the answer to that is comics. The answer is always going to be comics. What I do is I show you my comic book collection. And if you want to support that, if you want to help me monetize this crippling comic book habit, then what you gotta do is check in on my Patreon. I got tiers, very small tiers. People who give $1 a month make my world go round. Literally, they're rock solid, something I can always depend on. Never think that giving just a little bit doesn't matter. Giving just a little bit matters a lot. If a lot of people give just a little bit, it really makes a difference. So if you like any of this, and if you want to support me and my comic books, check out the Patreon. I don't usually give the hard sell. Maybe I need to give the harder sell. No one's asked me to do ads. I would totally do ads. Do I have the viewership for anyone to be offering me ad money? No. I've got to pump those numbers. Anyway, our specimen today, as a matter of fact, did spend a couple decades in a storage locker. Miraculously saved from insolvency a number of times. This is the first Thor 22 that was ever printed. If you don't know the history of the character, you might think, well, the first Thor 22 was probably printed in the Johnson administration. No. The first Thor 22 was printed in the Clinton administration, in the last year of it, because this came out in the winter of 2000. Thor was the last book out of the gate from the Heroes Return initiative, which followed the Heroes Reborn initiative. And Marvel's kind of held to that staggered schedule with Thor in the decades since. They don't launch him usually out of the big Avengers crossover. He gets his own relaunches because he carries that much weight within the company. And he kind of always has, and he still does to this day. And now his brother makes, some of the family money as well. People just like Asgardians. If they don't, you have to retool the whole affair because it's just everything is off. Your calibration is down. Because in a vacuum, this guy, he is one of the most popular characters, evergreen, since his creation. Some people are surprised, considering, I think, the profile that the character has had in recent decades. He was a relative blockbuster for them out of the gate. He didn't get a split book. Thor didn't have to share his book with anyone. He had his own backups, the Asgard. Later on, they put Inhumans backups in there, and the Inhumans backups are actually fun too, but you kind of would have preferred more in the way of the Tales of Asgard, actually, because there's just a lot more juice in the Asgard guys than the Inhumans. I'm sorry. That's kind of why they're still a foundational stone of Marvel to this day. And this isn't the first time Thor has ever met Thanos. Thor has met Thanos a couple times before, as a matter of fact, a few times, but it's always with a group. Always, other people doing something. He's got 20 people trying to kill him all at the same time. And this Thor, he wasn't alive for the first Infinity Gauntlet. He was dead in his own book for a while. That was the Eric Masterson Thor who gets just completely clowned because everyone gets clowned by Thanos in the Infinity Gauntlet. That's the charm of that book right there. The issue where he just murders everyone. And, I love the guy. But where do you go from there, man? That was really awesome. And you've been dining out on that for decades. No shame in your game, Mr. Thanos. But this comic also wasn't written by Jim Starlin. This comic was written by Dan Jurgens, and it's a rule that good comic book writers stumble using Thanos. And, there's the whole thing that a lot of the uses of Thanos over the years, including, I think, trying to remember, a lot of them were retconned on panel. They let him just go in and say, those were straight up faulty clones. The real Thanos just wouldn't have done those things. They let him do that. That's how much possession he had over that character and how much he still had by the turn of the century. He would be doing more Thanos for them for a decade and, 2 decades. I think they finally cut it quits with the Thanos books, but they did a lot of Thanos books. He came back to do a great deal of Thanos material. So, just on those terms, it's not as bad as Mark Waid using Thanos for Khazar, which, I think it killed the book. In hindsight, and the creative team leaving with the first year because Hero's Return expired. But besides that small detail, Khazar was a dead man walking without Mark Waid, because only fools like me stayed on after Mark Waid left Khazar. And I still hold it against Khazar to this day. Anyway, that was the period where this came out of Marvel, where Marvel had a lot of things going wrong. But the one good thing they had was the Tom Brevoort office. And okay, you've grown now. You might groan if you are an X-Men fan. You might hate this man with a purple passion. And that's extraordinarily interesting to me, because he was pretty much the best thing in the editorial field. He was pretty much the best thing Marvel had for a good 5-year stretch. If there was anything readable, like really readable, coming out of that company during that period, it might be because Tom Brevoort put it out of his offices, because he put out the Busiek-Perez Avengers. He put out Busiek on a lot of good books. Avengers Forever. But not just Avengers-centric books. In general, don't discount what I'm saying here. The company, it had a lot of problems. He got good talent for the books. They sold pretty well. This was hailed as a breakthrough at the time for John Romita Jr., although it hasn't been one of his more remembered runs. And that's interesting, because it's a very good run. Maybe the material just didn't hit as much. I don't know. Jurgens was on Thor for a while. This is towards the end of Romita Jr. on Thor with Jansen. But Jurgens, he's just getting started. He goes on for a while with, one of the Kuberts. I am much older now than the Kubert brothers are as well, and I still have trouble remembering Through the Mist of Time, which, because their wonderful father, in his infinite wisdom, decided, no, I'm going to give both of my sons names that scan identical. So you really have to think about it. So I always have to check. I always have to check. Anyway. And after that, you'd think, okay, well, that's a good long-ish run as a writer on Thor. But no, somehow Dan Jurgens stayed on the book long through the entirety of the New Marvel period. He was the guy who wrote Thor during the Back to Basics period, and he was the guy who kept the book when the edict came down, informally or not, like, we gotta update the way our books look, because we're getting lapped by this own in-house competition we spawned with the ultimate universe. We need to somehow take some of that jazz and put that in here. And that was the driving impetus behind Marvel culturally for half a decade. And this was the moment right before then, the tail end, the absolute fumes of the Bob Harris era. His vision of the company wasn't an animal that could live for very long, and that's why the next folks in the door said about changing things, and I don't agree with all the things they did to change. But I do agree that change was needed, so perhaps at this point we're just arguing about the chandelier. Anyway, as I was saying, this right here, it was billed as a big run for John Romita Jr., because this was coming off of the Tangent book he did, which was a revelation. It was printed straight to pencil, as my memory seems to suggest here. And it was his big Kirby move, Thor Ion of the New Asgods. And it was a direct attempt, you could tell on his part, to engage with the source material for both Thor and the New Gods. And his next big run for Marvel was Thor. And it was hot. It looked great. You know, it's decent as far as Thor goes. Believe it or not, the better or the more interesting part of the Dan Jurgens part of the Dan Jurgens run is later on when he sticks around in the middle of New Marvel and he just decides, well, I'm going to write Thor different now. And he does. And it's not on a dime, but the book transforms into being this very meditative, thoughtful book about religion and its place in American society after 9/11. And that becomes really a hook that carries the book through years, because they just take one, like a lot of the new Marvel stuff, it didn't really change that much. It just looked at things in a different way. Like, oh, what if we made the Hulk a bit more of a horror book, maybe even with some crime overtones? And they brought Bruce Jones in, and he did that, and it was great. And Bruce Jones was an old guard guy, and Dan Jurgens, Mr. Superman. You maybe give Dan Jurgens credit for being able to come in and write a pretty decent Kirby pastiche, because that's what John Romita Jr. was raring to do. And he got Klaus Janson on board to do it with him. And that's just an excellent looking comic book right there. They both stretch. And this, you can tell they're building up to the big finale, because it's Thor and Gog and Thanos. So it's just going to be a big story. This is issue 22. This keeps going till issue 25. So this is maybe the opening salvo of it. The last one is giant size and has a foil cover. One of the last foil covers that Marvel did in the 90s. If not the last, I don't know. They weren't doing that many at that period. So I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of, I don't want to say neat, but also, if you only do one maybe once every couple of years, maybe we won't hate them. Maybe they would be kind of cool. And that's still more or less my attitude. What you need to do is you need to sell the comic book. At the end of the day, that's your job. If you make comic books, is to sell the comic book to your reader. It's not to necessarily to show off or even give them a story. It's to sell it to them. That's what matters. Does it get in your hand, off the shelf, and go home? Whether or not it's a floppy on a newsstand or in a comic book store or found in a bookshelf. Different things get different people through the door. John Romita Jr. was still getting people through the door by 2000, and he would still go on to do impressive work in the 2010s and the 20-teens. I'm just, generally a fan of the man's work. So, yeah, what do we got going here? Oh, this is Captain Crunch. See, comics were doing better. We were in a better place as an industry when Captain Crunch wanted to give us a lot of money to put, 2-page spreads in the book. Is this, I don't know, are we a bit past the Captain Crunch demographic? Well, I guess that depends on how much Captain Crunch you eat. I literally have to not buy Captain Crunch because this stuff here, if you bring home a box of ambrosia, then you can just nail a box of those in a night and a half if you're not careful. That's how good they are. I have to not bring those things in the house. So yeah, the advertising, it did its job. The advertising did its job. I posted the other night the ads from one of the comics that I read on the TikTok, the A Bizarro book that Steve Gerber and Mark M.D. Bright did. And I posted the ads, and that thread got a lot of attention on the old Bluesky. And some people commented, like, wow, they used to load those things down full of ads. I said, yes, they did. Does it detract some? Not really, because this comic cost $1.99. And I thought that was exorbitant in the day, I promise you. If Marvel could come out with a package of any kind for $1.99, they would eat the universe. That's just not even a price point people think about. They certainly don't associate it with comic books because the way they make them now, they can't afford to print them that cheap. So yeah, I don't want to detract from the book because it is an extraordinarily nice looking book. But at the same time, this is 2 years into Jurgens and Romita Jr.'s run together. They're pretty comfortable working together, I think. This is a nice looking comic book. Who's doing the colors here? Wright and Bernardo. So Gregory Wright is still chugging away into the digital era. It's a nice looking comic book. Look at these colors. Look at these colors. All right, we'll come back to I know, you're groaning. I don't want to go back to the bullpen bulletins. We spent too much time talking about your cat. Don't make us read the bullpen bulletins. We're reading these things as much for my enjoyment as for yours. Friend. We're looking at some very nice work. I don't know if Thor was ever close to his heart, quite in the way that, Spider-Man, obviously. So, yeah, it's John Romita Jr. getting to draw the big guys, and if I want to say the lead-in for this was a story in Thor 2000, which was just how they were doing their annual numbering at the time, because we thought it was really impressive to have 2000 in the title of everything. We were so proud of ourselves for getting to 2000. Oh, how little we did know we were but babes in the woods. All right, but anyway, the lead-in for this was printed in that annual and had art by Ladron. Yeah, that Ladron. He was still doing a lot of Marvel work at the time. So, yeah, nice looking stuff. Maybe not in most people's top percentile of John Romita Jr. work, though. In hindsight, it feels almost like woodshitting for him. He's getting through learning something, perhaps. MyComicShop.com, still going. Still going. Of all the .com ads you encounter in these old magazines, not all of them are still going. That one's still going. So, Yeah, he's using a font in that word balloon there. RS and Comic Crafts Wes Abbott. Yeah, it just sort of lays there. I'm sorry. This maybe it's just because we've seen this trick a lot. This doesn't, the line weight for this sound effect, it doesn't live in the same universe as the lines that they're using to draw Thor. And that's what you miss. The lines are part of, something else. They're not also put down by another human hand. That's my old person opinion. So, yeah, nice looking stuff, well colored. It's like I say, it's the first part of a big hoedown with Thanos. Well, look at this. Yeah, we're towards the end of the subscriber era. Why they never tried in the era of loot boxes, why Marvel didn't go back to direct mail using that for their subscriber base, I don't know. That seems like something that they could have made money from, but I guess they don't really care about making money as an actual publisher of comic books, or they would make many different decisions than they do, now. There's always money in the banana stand. Oh, wow. Devourer of Men. All right, that guy looks like a devourer of men. And there's Baldar the Brave. Oh, Thor got eaten. That's fun. I was just sort of flipping along here. La-di-da. That guy looks cool. See, it's a fun comic. If you like John Romita Jr., you'll enjoy this comic for that reason. I think, honestly, if you're going to read Dan Jurgens' Thor, read the weird stuff at the end where it's talking about, why don't people actually worship Thor anymore in the real world? That's the hook that he arrives at. And people start worshiping Thor again. And it lasts for a while. And I thought it was an excellent volley from Dan Jurgens. Do something different. He did. It was kind of interesting. After he left the book, they did a Ragnarok associated with the Avengers Disassembled crossover, although it really had nothing at all to do with it. It just happened to be done around the same time. And then they would wait a while again until after Civil War to bring Thor back. And the original scuttlebutt had been for a while that they were going to bring Thor back in Civil War. And in hindsight, okay, you can see maybe where that rumor got started. But if you read that book now, you won't know at the time, Thor had been dead for a while. And he was still going to be dead for a little bit because he came back right in the aftermath of Civil War, like I say. They usually launch him on his own. He's that important. And they got JMS, and the book sold pretty well. So we got the Wizard. Oh man, do you want me to go through the Wizard fan categories? I don't know. Comics' greatest moment. What do they think? What do we think in hindsight? Comics' greatest moment of 1999 would have been, according to Wizard. Beaten and battered Avengers confront Ultron in Avengers 22. We all know that scene. That scene is still in currency, although they didn't use the line in the movie. And no one understood why they didn't use the line in the movie. It's like, why? You're going to do the movie, but you're not going to do the line that the big story had? I don't know, whatever. Death of Karen Page, Daredevil 5. I've railed against that. I think that was a serious miscalculation on the part of every single person involved in that. They should never have let anyone do it because they can't bring that character back. That just doesn't make as much sense for a character like Daredevil. It just doesn't. She's gone. I don't know, maybe they'll bring her back. Maybe the Winter Soldier, Karen Page, somehow. All right, there you go. Someone's going to do it at some point, but it was just a mistake. It was just a big mistake, I think. Don't get me started. Public's discovery that Superman is married in Superman 152. All right. You may chuckle at that in hindsight, but I was reading the Superman books at the time still, and I liked that. That was actually, I thought, a pretty clever story beat where Superman forgot to take off his ring. Think about that. Think about that. If Superman never once wore a wedding ring and then someday out of nowhere he did, yeah, that would be the biggest story on the planet. That happened. That was actually kind of a fun story. They still had a few things in the chamber at that point, but, you know, this was, the Superman books were in need of a refurbishment. God bites out Jesse Custer's eye, and I remember Preacher 49 being kind of an anticlimax. The book never went where I thought it was going to go during its end game, and honestly, I need to go back and reread it is what I need to do. Midnighter's ship crashes into Gamora in Authority 4. Is that what people remember out of that run? I mean, people remember a lot of things out of that run, but that's just a plot beat. Ow. What was I just saying about the wires and this young man? He literally brought the entire operation to a standstill on account of his long-standing rascality. I refuse to stand for it. Friend, I refuse to stand for it. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes. Thor defeats the Dark Gods in Thor 12, and that was the end of the first storyline on this book. It looked pretty good, but, you know, it was, in hindsight, I think the one that people actually still remember fondly is this scene from Avengers 22. People still love that book. People love that book. People manifestly love this run of the Avengers in a way that people do not manifestly love the Kevin Smith Daredevil. I gave Kevin Smith a fair amount of credit because I thought for a while that he had a pretty decent visual sense, but it turns out he was just holding a camera at the level of your head. You know, in hindsight, it was competently written, and that is probably the worst thing that you can say about it, because to sell that story beat, you needed to be great, and it was primetime Joe Quesada, and it's just not something I'd recommend anyone to read. Even if you're a fan of them, I don't think it is a good run of comics. It sold really well. It helped remake the company ultimately, but I had issues with it. Amazing Spider-Man 16. Oh, we're deep in the Howard Mackie and John Byrne era on Amazing Spider-Man by 2000. That is what the Spider-Man books look like on the eve of Ultimate Spider-Man. If in hindsight, you wonder, like, well, was it necessary to totally, throw everything out? In hindsight, I wasn't buying Howard Mackie and John Byrne on Amazing Spider-Man. I had some modicum of self-respect. Ty Templeton's doing the all ages Avengers stuff with Derek Khan, probably butchering that. I don't remember if I ever saw any of these, but if you find one in a stand, that's Ty Templeton work. We're 17 issues into Christopher Priest's Black Panther. They've moved on from Joe Jusko. He only did the first few issues. And they had Mike Manley do some, and then they were on to Sal Velluto. It had pretty decent art through its whole run. It made it through a longer run than Black Panther had ever had before. And it was a struggle. It was an uphill struggle the whole way. That was a beloved, critical darling that basically everyone fought. And in hindsight, maybe it should have ended a little bit earlier. Maybe it should have had a clean wrap-up as opposed to just dribbling on for a while. They were struggling to keep the car going down the street. And the book lost focus. It lost, I think, a lot of what the people who enjoyed about it. But it maybe kept it on the stands for another year But still, proof of concept had been. Christopher Priest had kept Black Panther on stands for 4 years. Almost 4. 5 years? No, 5 years. That's a long run with a character in a very, very rough retail environment. And, that's the version of the character that, more or less, with some more recent adjustments, cast member additions, that's still the version of the character that made it to the movie screens, in which everyone loves. Blade, I want to talk about another character, and this is 2000. This is after they've already had a movie that everyone loved. I want to say the sequel isn't the year after this. People know they're making a sequel. People love Blade, and they still can't support more than these little 6-issue miniseries they're dribbling out here. Cable 78. Joe Pruitt. I want to say, this is when you got to get off the cable car, so to speak, because they got rid of Joe Casey and Ladron. They're like, no, you guys are great. You're doing such a great job on cable. We're going to fire you and take over the book, and we're going to give it back to Rob. And Rob's only going to do it for a couple months. We all know Rob's only going to do it for a couple months. Rob probably knows he's only going to do it for a couple months. But we had something that probably was not going to stay around for that much longer. Was Ladron ultimately going to stick around on cable for 5 years? He actually did do a little bit more Marvel work, but maybe he had already outgrown cable by the time that run ended. At the time, it felt like we were being robbed, but, in hindsight, he was doing near monthly cable with Joe Casey. That was a time to be alive, friends. Deathlock, this Deathlock, another Joe Casey book. It didn't last a year. And this book, Joe Casey, Leonardo Manco, one of the most gorgeous books from this era. And I think they were in the one box of comics, of actual comics, that got lifted during that the break-in that I alluded to a year ago. I lost something. I lost, like I said, the first Carnage and most of that run of Amazing Spider-Man, which, if you're going to find books that actually might be worth money, the first Carnage. All right, you got me. Maybe I shouldn't have, organized those and put them up front. That's on me. Everything should stay disorganized going forward. But yeah, I used to have them. I don't think I do, but that's one of the best series from this period. So is Earth X. We read Earth X on the TikTok channel. Generation X, we're to Jay Faber and Matt Smith. Yeah, even Larry Hama's gone. Jay Faber is also doing The New Warriors. This is number 7 of a, as I recall, really underwhelming relaunch. Punisher number 1, Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon. So that was a big month. That just completely bulldozed a decade of diminishing returns. In an instant, people were in love with this guy. Again, I cannot stress to you how much people loved this, especially compared with what, Joe Quesada's outfit had been doing with the Punisher, where, you got Bernie Wrightson doing the Punisher, and they made the Punisher some kind of demon hunter. And he stayed that way for at least a couple more stories, including, I think, one by Dreamwave Studios, and that's a really bizarre-looking book. Anyway, it wasn't a status quo. It was built to last. They do it with the Punisher sometimes. When they just run him to ground, they do something really weird with him for a year, see how long they can keep it going, and then when it's done, people want classic Coke back. And it actually works pretty well with the Punisher. You got to do some really awful variant, or in the case of And, Angel Punisher, it was what Bernie Wrightson wanted to do. And Bernie Wrightson, at that point in his career, didn't have that many comic books left in him to draw, straight up. So the fact that he wanted to draw Angel Punisher, it means that we need to look at them and read them because he drew them. But they're terrible. They are manifestly terrible. They're really only worth reading because one person said yes to drawing them. But, a lot of comics could do worse than to be drawn by Bernie Wrightson, even if they do have Angel Punisher. Spider-Girl is already up to 19 with DeFalco and Olive. That's going to be one of the defining, narratives of the new Marvel period. It's just how long Spider-Girl can keep going when Joe Quesada manifestly does not understand the appeal and yet is repeatedly stymied by a strong fan base, maybe the strongest fan base we have ever seen organized in the comics industry. I am not kidding. Spider-Girl, the original fan base for this book, the Mayday Parker version, is probably the strongest fan base in comic book history. If you put them pound for pound, what they were able to accomplish, they could probably, demolish all comers. With serious respect for keeping that book, of all books, of all the random things, just inexplicably. We love it. We want it to keep going. And they did. And they fought an empire about it. And they were arguably, I think, more successful than Peter David at arguing a similar kind of point, albeit less acerbically than Peter David. Spider-Man Universe. Oh, this is, I think, one of their attempts at a reprint volume that would maybe be a little thicker in the hand. So it's 3 recent Spider-Man books. And maybe at this point, they were starting to think that something like Shonen Jump was going to be more popular in this country than it was. Because Shonen Jump, point of fact, was sold in the United States for a while. Shonen Jump has not been sold in the United States for a while. Even though the publishing, everything that's in it that you would want to see more or less makes it over here. But in terms of being a monthly magazine, it did pretty well for a while on the twilight of the American comic book industry's engagement with the public newsstand. Shonen Jump was there, throwing punches with the best of them, but not even it could stick around. And then honestly, there's a little surprise there that they have never been able to make anything cheap enough, because that's the final frontier for the newsstand. Is you just got to put something out that's cheap so that little hands can pick it up. And the newsstand hasn't done that in America in years. Little hands aren't going to pick up anything on the newsstand because it's all like $8 or $12. You got to put out something cheap. Cheap enough that a kid can reach down and get it, but that they think is worth their time. You got to sell the comic. What was I just saying? Wasn't I just saying the other day they needed to put out books of the Chris Giarusso cartoons? They did. I saw them on the stands recently, so they put out a new printing of them. It's great. This type of material now, it's just the little comic strips they run, under the bullpen bulletins. But now this stuff actually sells. They have characters who only sell in this format. Jeff the Land Shark? Jeff the Land Shark? Jeff the Land Shark is making a lot of people money. Straight up. That's Marvel for you. They do not care. If you want to buy Garth Ennis on The Punisher, yeah, they'll sell you that. And they will also sell you Jeff the Land Shark. And you'll like it. All right. Here's a Liam Sharp comic that not a lot of people have probably read. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that this is a good Liam Sharp comic. This is not a good comic. This is frankly a terrible comic on a lot of ways that it could never escape. the creation of this comic book is a gravity. It exists in the context of this thing called Countdown. Nothing good. Nothing good came of Countdown, except for the return of giant Jimmy Olsen, Turtle Boy. But that should tell you about the level you're dealing with here. Yeah, they used Turtle Boy. That's how good Countdown had it going. And they were just throwing good creators after dogs, bookkeeping assignments. Who cared what Lord Havok and the Extremists were doing during Countdown? I read the comic. I inexplicably even own the comic. I will tell you, in my own defense, I only bought this years later for a steep discount off cover price because Liam Sharp drew it. And I will pick up anything I see with Liam Sharp's name on it, even if I know going in, because of my experience with the original Countdown, when I was actively reading the books to follow what was going on, to be able to talk about them. Even just at the level of skimming, Countdown was... and this is Liam Sharp with Rob Hunter and Liam Sharp inking, with Frank Tieri writing. He worked a lot in the 2000s. I'm not going to make any arguments pro or con Frank Tieri. Michael Strahan. Okay, that's who that is. I don't know all the football guys. I'm sorry. So, editor's note. The events of this issue take place between Countdown 29 and 27. Well, true believers, this is such a wonderful comic book. I don't want you to make a mistake there. So the Lord Havok and the Extremists, right? They're one joke. And the joke is that during the Giffen and Demetrius Justice League, which is excellent run of comics, but these guys premiered during that run, and I do not think they're that run's finest moment. They are a team of alternate universe villains that are sort of, the gimmick was, you know how the Squadron Supreme is all the big DC heroes, from the Justice League with Marvel coat of paint. Lord Havok and the Extremists is basically, what if Doctor Doom put together, Marvel's Legion of Doom, and they just took over their planet? So you've got a Sabretooth and a Dr. Octopus and the main guy, Lord Havok. He's a Doctor Doom figure, even though at a glance you're going to look at the guy and you're going to think, oh, what is Marvel's Minion doing on this book? Drawn by Liam Sharp of all people, so I guess if you're going to get a character to look a little bit like Minion, well, I mean, you might as well get Liam Sharp, but maybe you just made some mistakes along the way. So I don't know what's going on here. I'm not even going to try to understand. It looks abominable. Because what I said is it's bookkeeping. DC and Marvel to a lesser degree, but it seemed like DC really got hooked to putting out a giant chunk of their stories through these huge crossover meat grinders to a degree that it ruined a lot of creators. It hurt their careers to be doing junk like this. Lost. I should go back and give Lost a try. My mom swore by it. She wanted me to watch it, and I just didn't have the interest to do it. Those last seasons just got such a bad rap. They did. Even, people who love them after all this time still have to defend them. It was a cultural touchstone, that argument. Appleseed. I think they did a few releases of Appleseed material over the period here. Still have never seen the original Appleseed. Probably should. I haven't seen everything. You know, there's something to look forward to in my 60s. So yeah, I'm not even... God of War. I know who that guy is. Never played one of these games, but I pretty much get his deal. He's a Greek-themed dude who fights the Greek gods, right? Something like that. Great idea for a video game character. Perfect. Right there. One day they're going to put him in some prestige television show. This will be Dave Bautista. And he'll be crying about, you know, whatever family they give him. And it'll win awards. Whoa, life can be hard. What am I looking at there? The comic is upstaged by this ad. My goodness. That's a lot of things. I don't know. It can be real tough out there. People try to trip you up. Others want you to smoke weed or do stupid things that aren't you. Be real. You're not made of metal, but you're strong enough to make your own decisions. So what are you going to do? Well, that's interesting. There's a off-brand Superman of one of the kinds who was running around with Monarch. Oh yeah, because that was one of the overarching side stories alongside Countdown was Monarch was going around doing something. So in some way, this was supposed to be leading into the Grant Morrison crossover, Final Crisis. They opted not to participate in that part of the promotion. Grant Morrison did not use Monarch in Final Crisis. So yeah, shortcuts are being taken. It's issue 6 of a crossover something or other. Yeah, it's all the people who aren't the Marvel characters, and they haven't been the Marvel characters for a long time. And Superman's doing something. Monarch leaves because he's got something else to do someplace with more interesting people. And literally, that is the note the comic ends on, is Monarch has more interesting things to do elsewhere. And maybe he's going to like show these people around, but then they're never going to be probably mentioned again. Because I don't think these guys are there when the Jimmy Olsen Turtle Boy stuff is going around. Oh man. So yeah, this is what Liam Sharp was doing. And no, where was the NDC? Oh, it's right on it. May 2008. So yeah, there you go. My goodness. Blue Beetle 25. So we're almost coming to the end of. So this is towards the end of that really well-regarded first stretch of the this iteration of the Blue Beetle character, which I read at the time, and one bit has stuck with me, and that was, well, when he mails the letter, and if you've read the story, you know what I'm talking about, because it's just this really clever bit. I don't really remember that much else about it, but I remember the bit with the letter. That was really clever. Yeah, we're down to number 5, so countdown. We're in the final month before Grant Morrison enters the building, and it is all instantly memory hold. No one will ever mention anything that happened in the entire run of Countdown ever again. But I paid 50 cents for this because I wanted to see what my dog Liam Sharp was up to, and yeah, he was drawing a comic that month. That is for certain. I don't blame him. You cannot blame him for this. This is not what anyone wanted to be doing with their lives. That's the downfall of this mode of comic book publishing, is that you eventually end up with books like Lord Havok and the Extremists. It's being written to tie in to another story that people actively do not want to be published. And yet you have to find people to spend their precious life energy creating this. That right there, that is a sin in the comic book industry, I think. Alright, this episode's already basically slaughtered for search engine optimization purposes, so let's go all in and finish up an extra long episode with an issue of Alpha Flight by John Byrne. Why? Because I care about you, dear viewer. I'm only bringing you the hottest spices out of the kitchen. So yeah, John Byrne Alpha Flight. This is the run that made Alpha Flight's reputation. They weren't really credible in terms of being able to support their book, any kind of vehicle. John Byrne was actually adamant about that going in, and honestly, I think to this day, he thinks that it was an ill fit for a book, even though he did it for over 2 years. And in complete fairness to him, this is some of his best work ever. And it's because it is precisely, directly attributable to the fact that he is on record for years saying he did not think Alpha Flight would be enough on their own to support their own book. So when the time came to cash a check on the Alpha Flight book, and he had to do it, he was thinking outside of the box from day one. And you're thinking, well, okay, this is John Byrne. How outside of the box could outside of the box be? And in hindsight, it actually ended up being pretty predictive in terms of a lot of the directions the comic book industry was going to go. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that, he broke the team down. He didn't think Alpha Flight on their own were just that interesting. So for at least the first year of the book, he split the team up and just did a series of 1 and 2 issue long character pieces, more or less just to nail down who these people were. But what that meant was the book changed. It shifted. It was a number of different things over the course of its first year. Every issue felt like a challenge to John Byrne. John Byrne didn't like that. I guess is a way of putting it. Like, he was creatively challenged to do something interesting and different, and he's complained about it consistently. That's the man to a T. You know, he is not incapable of doing interesting work. He understands how to put together a comics page. He has many good stories to his name. But then he's also done many more comics than just the choice stuff, than just like, you know, the first year of Alpha Flight. Yeah, first year of Alpha Flight, strong stuff. At the end of the day, the man's place in history, why was he popular? Okay, this is an example you can look to. Like it or not, now, this is what stood out on the stands as being a decent, well-regarded, selling Marvel book. And it was able to keep going on Byrne's infrastructure for years and years and years and years. But yeah, you know, this was 1983. So, you know, they kept Alpha Flight on the stands for 10 years, based just on what John Byrne did during this run. That's not nothing. You know, he created the guys with Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont didn't really want to have anything much to do with Alpha Flight, other than they were a part of, you know, Wolverine's origin, and that primacy has remained to this day. And it was a big deal. It actually gave Alpha Flight more significance at the time than may be obvious in hindsight, because they were Wolverine's connection to his past. And now, of course, we know that Wolverine grew up as a little schmuck on the Canadian prairie, so maybe the fact that he hung out with another tall guy and redhead combo years ago it maybe isn't as significant now when really that association was able to keep, be one of the pillars in the book, that every now and again they could have Wolverine on the cover and it fit and it went with the story. The only reason anyone did buy Alpha Flight was that Wolverine would show up once in a while. That's just, how the cookie crumbles in 1983 and now. But see, this is interesting stuff. Who's coloring? Is this Glynis Oliver? Andy Yankas. Tom Orzechowski on lettering. So yeah, this is a nice looking comic book. One of these characters, Snowbird, she's got magic powers. She's part animal, so she can turn into all these other creatures. And she's more tapped in with the series' ongoing meta plot. That's another thing, meta plot, in terms of the great beasts, who are the big baddies, going back to Canadian prehistory. So he built this whole lore more or less out of a whole cloth, just using Canadian sources and locations, and there's a lot there they've been pulling from for these characters all this time. You can't say that his time on this book specifically wasn't extraordinarily generative. Look at this. This is nice stuff. Interesting coloring here. But you see, just from this issue, the team, they're actually together in this, and they have a few training runs, as I recall, in this first stretch of issues, and it's full of tension because they don't always know each other that well or get along. There's not a lot of incentive for this, and I think maybe this was also core to John Byrne's complaint was these people on their own don't necessarily have a lot of incentive to spend time together, other than literally the government is paying me to be here. And over time, they grew connections, and they're all part of this family, and eventually they lose. I'm giving away, a 1984 comic book. One of the members dies in a really spectacular on-panel way that traumatizes people. So the book is interesting. North Star's character, say what you will about John Byrne. There's a lot to say. But the character was always meant to be, as he is, gay from the beginning, even if maybe in hindsight some of the portrayal isn't what you might want to see in 2024. They were adamant about putting at least that character, and it was alluded to strongly throughout, it's a big plot beat in the X-Men Alpha Flight crossover, even before they can say it explicitly. And this is one of the villains who later ended up showing up in the Avengers. He shows up now and again because he's just an immortal supervillain with alien technology who lives at the top of the world. So Marina, her character, kind of gets a raw deal in the Avengers, and she's basically just written out of continuity for decades. He's kind of cool. Carol Danvers kills him, although it doesn't stick, I don't think. Oh, I love this strikingly off model for the brand, but it's early Herb Trimpe, so he's the guy who was drawing G.I. Joe very early. But they settled into their house style so early that seeing this, early Herb Trimpe stuff is kind of a trip. I've never heard anyone say one good thing about that video game. Never heard anyone say anything bad about it either, for that matter. So we're getting this guy's origin. He's a caveman in the long ago. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't that just Vandal Savage? I mean, yeah. Leaning a bit heavier on he gets captured by an alien base, so it's not a magic meteorite. It's a alien ship that crashes. He goes to investigate. He's a caveman. The ship, well, it spends centuries doing Harlan Ellison torture on this poor caveman. But then eventually, after thousands and thousands of years, they keep his brain alive, and it just takes over the place, and he's eventually able to regrow himself perfect clone bodies because he is the master of the world. So great supervillain. I would say probably a better supervillain than Alpha Flight. Needed, because no one's used this guy much, because he's an Alpha Flight guy. They have a really top-notch, ancient caveman villain with alien technology. Cool-looking alien technology too. And these Jokers show up, and he's doing crossovers with Fantastic Four 260, because he's still doing Fantastic Four for a couple years, until he heads on over to do Superman for a while. Oh, continuing the origins of Alpha Flight, and yeah, he did these backups that were like vignettes of their lives before the team started. So, there's just development, and dealing with how these people came to know each other, the social connections and the government connections that went into creating Alpha Flight. He had to put a lot of work into making this, and like I said, he resented it, I think, because he actually had to think, like, okay, this comic book isn't going to write itself. I have to come up with ideas. Oh shit. All right, Guardian pinup. There you go. With, that looks like John Byrne as well. AD&D, early video game. No one really had a lot of use for their video games until, seems like Baldur's Gate, that one that they just did recently that I know about. I don't play video games, but I know about it simply because people were talking about it in hushed tones, like, wait, they made a good Dungeons & Dragons video game? Because that is not the reputation that company had in the video game field for a long time. For a long time, they just gave up on video games. In the 80s, after video games come back with Nintendo, and when TSR is at the height of their Marvel buying ads period, if you remember, there was a TSR ad, I think, in the first chunk of this, one of their very first TSR ads that ran periodically. Yeah. For the Star Frontiers game. You see, TSR used to be an IP company. This is the funny thing. Marvel used to be a publisher that had IP on the side. TSR used to actually produce an immense amount of IP that was a sort of struggling publisher. And they've switched their they've switched their focuses. All right, so going back to this bullpen bulletins, we get two in one issue because it's Christmas. I love you. I want the best for you. So, what's in the hype box for this month? Avengers is up to 236. We're not at Busick Perez yet. This is Roger Stern, Al Milgrom, and Joe Sinnott. That right there, folks, that is a silver dollar creative team. Cloak and Dagger #1. Cloak and Dagger, the first miniseries by Bill Mantlo, Rick Leonardi, Terry Austin. I've had it for a while. It is in the canon, ready to go for the show. I cut back on the number of TikTok videos. I'm only doing them every other day because I did 700 daily comic book videos. The question should not be, why did I suddenly stop making daily videos? The question should be why I started in the first place. So with that in mind, I figured, I could probably cut back to every other day, and people really wouldn't have much room to complain now, would they? I enjoy doing them. And the Cloak and Dagger miniseries, it's in the pile to do for that. Now that I'm only doing it half as much, it probably means there's a lot more gas in the tank to get to, books like that. New Mutants 8. So we're still on Claremont Buscema, he's not on the book for long. He's replaced by Sinkovich at the end of the first year. Bob McLeod is still on it. He's not going to be associated with it for that much longer. The Thing is still on issue 4. You know, The Thing has just never been able to sell as a solo character. He sold well on the newsstand for Marvel 2-in-1. Everyone loved him. But his solo book only lasted 3 years. And he's only ever had intermittent, spasms ever since. And that doesn't make any sense to me. He should be able to pull his weight as a solo character. I'm sorry. Marvel Tales is still in the flush of reprinting the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Man. When I wanted to learn about the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Man coming up, I picked these out of the back issue box, the Marvel Tales run, because those did not cost that much money, because those books have been reprinted quite a bit over the years. ROM is up to 47, so ROM still has a good few years left. What If 41, so What If the Submariner had not lost his memory? This is early book-length work from Mark Silvestri. What else? Captain America Annual 7. A bell is ringing in my brain telling me that this is the one with the Cosmic Cube in it, which is why I would have picked it out of the back issue bins, because it had a Cosmic Cube in it. That's how I prioritized back issue buying for surprisingly long period of time. Is someone doing something with a Cosmic Cube inside this comic? US 1, it's been downgraded to a limited series at this point. I don't think US 1 was originally supposed to be a limited series. We looked at the first issue on the TikTok a while ago. Fun book. Speaking of Al Milgrom. Star Wars is on 76, so Star Wars is going to keep going for another 3 years, I think. It limps along. The last period is bi-monthly because it also has a strong fan base up to the end, but there was always going to be a strong fan base for Star Wars. That's the people who were buying the West End role-playing games in a couple years after this, and the books and the comic books when they started up at the beginning of the 90s. All right, well, I think that's enough. I think that's 3 wildly different comic books. Did we want to talk about more than 3 comic books? Probably. I don't know. You get me in a good mood. And who knows where we'll end up. So anyway, if you like this show, if you like anything I do, please check out the Patreon. Just $1 gets you a ton of stuff to download and makes the biggest difference in my life. It really does. If you want to support these videos, if you want to support anything I do, any of the writing I do, that's the lever you pull. I do every other day reviews on the TikTok. I enjoy doing them. I don't plan to stop doing them anytime soon, and that's probably the best answer why I'm not doing them daily anymore. Is it was either every other day or stopping. Daily, I think in hindsight, was 700. I did it. I proved I can do that. I'm still putting out like 15 new comic reviews a month. Who is doing that? Just on the rig. Roll out of bed. Write a comic book review. Like it's nothing. Anyway. I have a podcast with Claire Napier. It's called Udder Madness. We talk about Top Cow comics and everything entailed by that voluminous udder of Top Cow. What else? Oh yeah. The most recent thing I have up at the Journal is a long feature article on Oliver Schrowen's Sunday. Everyone's saying it's the book of the year. It probably is. It's a good book. Go read my review. If you hate my writing, I think you'll love this one. And if you go in the archive just before that, I did a big write-up on Maria Yave just a couple months ago. I'm gearing up for the beginning of the year. I want to be writing more. That's the plan. That's why I'm trying to do only every other day for the comic book reviews, so I can do more reviews at places like the Comics Journal. I know. Maybe I'll pop up somewhere else. That's something I usually do when I have the time. We'll see. Have a wonderful day. Please, keep your chin up. Bon courage. Be kind to animals, small children, all that jazz. You know all that jazz. Please, please, have a wonderful day.